Hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining today's webinar. My name is Melissa Stept and I'm the Marcom manager here at Cardiolog Analytics. And I'm joined today by SharePoint expert Jill Hannemann. So I'll go ahead and kick things off. Today's webinar is part 2 of our webinar series with Jill. And today's webinar is about supporting users after your Teams rollout. A bit of housekeeping first. This webinar is being recorded. If you want to share this with a colleague, we'll go ahead and send an email with the recording after today's session. And of course, if you have any questions, please send them through the questions box within the GoToWebinar panel. We'll leave some time towards the end for a Q&A. You can also connect with us on Twitter with the Twitter handle @Cardiolog. So in regards to the agenda for today's webinar, I'll start off with a very short introduction. I'll talk a little bit about Cardiolog Analytics and who we are. And then Jill will go ahead and give her introduction and then jump into how you can effectively support your users after rolling out Teams. I'll then go into a quick demo of Cardiolog Analytics and Cardiolog Engage to show you how analytics and advanced internal communication can help you boost adoption in SharePoint, Office 365, and Microsoft Teams. At the end, we'll be doing a Q&A, so again, please feel free to send your questions throughout the course of the presentation. So I'll start off with a brief introduction. Cardiolog Analytics has been around for about 14 years now, since 2005, and we're based out of Boston. Over the past 14 years, we've been focused on web analytics designed for SharePoint and now Office 365 and Microsoft Teams. Our flagship solution is Cardiolog Analytics, and it's built specifically for internal platforms, including all versions of SharePoint up to 2019, as well as SharePoint Online and Office 365. We can also track third-party tools like Yammer, Teams, and CRM tools, and our solution is available both on-prem and as a SaaS version based on Power BI. So now we'll go ahead and hand things over to Jill.
Great. Thanks so much, Melissa. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Jill Hannemann. I am a modern workplace lead in the West for Avanade Advisory. And my background is pretty straightforward. I've spent the last 15 plus years working in the portals and knowledge management space. I started working in the Microsoft ecosystem with MOS 2007 and really just got very excited about how integrated Office products were, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, could be within the portal environment. And so I think we're all here, because we understand that power, and to see the evolution of SharePoint 2019 on-prem to, Office 365 and what capabilities we have in the cloud, it's really an exciting time. So we are going to be focusing on Teams, but I would like to just kind of caveat that, my experience and my passions really are on the softer side. It's really about how technology influences and impacts the user experience, and more so the employee experience as a whole. So I'm a frequent speaker in the SharePoint community, and I'll be at a couple of SharePoint conferences coming up in the next couple of weeks. So SharePoint Fest Seattle, as well as SP TechCon Boston. And I live in Seattle, but reach out to me. Would be happy to hear from you and continue the conversation as we go along. So thanks, Melissa. And if we can do the switch.
Yes, I'll make you a presenter right now.
Okay, great. All right. So this is the part 2 conversation that we started before in creating your roadmap for teams. So now what happens after you've rolled teams out? How do you continue to support your users? And it's kind of a really good partnership, this conversation with Cardiolog, because a lot of supporting your users has to do with how your users are adopting teams. And one of the ways to find out how they're using teams is through the analytics. So we will talk a little bit about different techniques and different ways that you can continue to support your users. But first, I would like to just give a quick shout out to my sponsor, who is Avanade. And Avanade has a really unique story. We were the great idea of Accenture and Microsoft coming together to create a company that would focus on the Microsoft ecosystem and bring innovative and very, very comprehensive solutions to the marketplace. And I think that we have been able to do that in our almost 20-year history. So we were recently named a market leader by IDC MarketScape in June 2019. And this year, we were also the Internet of Things Partner of the Year award for Microsoft. So we have a lot of experience, and our focus with the Microsoft ecosystem is just supported by our access to and our relationship with Microsoft, and then the power of the Accenture consulting brand. So lots of really great things always happening at Avanade, and it's a very exciting place to work. So I wanted to start this conversation off. There are a lot of news items happening around Teams in the marketplace, and Microsoft is throwing a lot of things out there every day. So it's really disrupting the marketplace, and I find it really exciting to kind of be a part of this transition that we're seeing, kind of Teams and Slack battling it out in the marketplace. But Microsoft, just after our last webinar, Microsoft announced that they would be ending service for Skype for Business Online on July 31st, 2021. So when Microsoft announces a date, you know it's real, and everyone starts to scramble to get their ducks in a row so they're not caught up by the end of service announcements. So this is definitely an interesting nugget that the end is near. They've been talking about it for a long time, and now we finally know when the end date for the service will occur. So it's timely that either you are already on Teams and you have discontinued service and you've transitioned all of your employees over to Teams and away from Skype for Business Online, or you are on your way. So just kind of a caveat for this. They will be continuing on-premises support, and the consumer product Skype will continue to exist. So there's a link to the article, or one of the articles, from Redmond PC Magazine. So you can check it out and you can read a few more details about it. So one of the things that I like to acknowledge is that Teams is a new way to work, and that's probably the largest transition, especially in the Teams channels area. If your users, if your employees are familiar with using SharePoint team sites and they work in collaborative workspaces, it might not be that big of a transition, but for a lot of organizations, they are moving to Office 365 for the first time, and they are getting these tools now, like Teams, that they want to roll out because they can be really transformative and improve employees' lives and make them easier. But there are a few realities that are associated with leveraging Teams. It's intentionally transparent, and And the idea that you would type a question to someone in a conversation that is open to the entire team versus sending them an email can sometimes be very daunting. And in an example I'll show you a little bit later, we've noticed at Avanade an uptick in chat, but not necessarily conversations. And so there can often be some transition in getting people comfortable with putting themselves out there, with putting their information out there for an entire team or an audience within a team to consume. And so there are different layers of security associated with it, but the fact of the matter is it's a different world. And oftentimes company cultures may not be transparent, and people may be very guarded, and that might be embedded in the company culture. And so not to say that that really has to change, but there has to be some sort of bridge to that to give your users some comfort level. So, document sharing and conversations, these may be large culture shifts for your organization. There's no more attachments. The idea that you would just put a document into a team and then you would message someone in a conversation and tag them so that they are notified that the document is there waiting for them. No more emailing links even. This is a part, these are all big changes to work habits that people have grown to know and find a great deal of security in, that they can rely on these tools. So Teams has to become that new tool. It has to become the new way of working and a core part of the everyday experience for the user. So I know that that is asking a lot, and I wanted to kind of paint the picture of the utopia, right? This, to say we've made it, to say we are focusing on our employee experience and it's consequently improving our customer experience as a result. But I am going to touch on employee experience for a little bit, just because I believe that Teams has the ability to be transformative for an organization in the way they collaborate and the way users get their work done. So these are just a couple of ideas and a couple of scenarios that perhaps maybe these could be your goal. Maybe this could be your goal to, substantially increase your people's productivity on everyday tasks, and to look at examples where there might be challenges in the productivity of certain departments or certain groups, and to try and problem solve and leverage some of these technologies to be the core underlying driver that helps move things along more quickly. Or translating and being able to analyze how your new digital employee experience, your new digital workplace is translating into higher client satisfaction. And for for a consulting company like Avanade, we are constantly looking at ways that we can improve our own employee experience and realize the transition and correlation to our customer experience. When we're faster, when we're accurate, when we have high quality of our work products and we're innovative, we are better for our customers, and our customers appreciate what we're able to bring to the table for them. So just kind of some thoughts to leave you with in thinking through how can we take it a step further. This is also another reminder that there is disruption every day, and our users and our employees are becoming even more expectant of high quality service from internal IT. And it should never be an excuse that our internal IT, is not modern enough, or our internal IT isn't as responsive. You should be there because there are expectations, and that work and life expectations around technology are starting to converge. And this is also really driving toward, rapid development of digital technology to advance industries. So I'm finding more and more that organizations who are able to modernize, who are able to take on these new technologies, especially like teams, are putting themselves in a position to be ready for the future, to be ready to modernize and compete at the highest level against their competitors. So in our last conversation, at the very end, I shared our change journey approach for adoption and measurement. So this is literally the blueprint that we like to walk our customers through. And I talked a little bit about, change impact and user discovery. We think that this step is really critical because this is really where you're going to define your hypothesis. This is where you're going to set your metrics on, what change measurement is going to look like and what's our benchmark, where are we today and where are we going to go, so that after we have implemented a great deal of elements within our change plan to getting users into teams, how can we say that we have done a good job? What's at the end to say we've succeeded with adoption, and what's the measure to say we've made a difference? And so data can by and large be the primary driver of looking at the numbers and to determine the level of change. And then all of these items in the middle are really your activities. And so I'm going to kind of focus on that for just a second, because I'm going to lead you into a case study of ourselves, of Avanade. So success requires a benchmark, and it's really important that you define what it is you are trying to prove. And this is really the case of any workplace analytics scenario. You need to define a hypothesis for the adoption and figure out what it is you're trying to prove with this. If it's just that you want to say, we have managed the transformation, we have moved our folks to Teams, they are using the tool, and we can decommission Skype, and that we are comfortable decommissioning Skype because we've transitioned our users, that is a very viable hypothesis to move forward with. However, it could be a little bit more complex than that. You could be saying, we are looking to increase productivity. We're looking to reduce the amount of time between certain activities that take place in our work process, to make it faster, to get our product to the customer more quickly, or transform our product to become more innovative. So there could be a lot of different hypotheses that you have in mind, and either way, I always highly recommend having that clear goal and keeping the end in mind. So I wanted to kind of take a minute in thinking through how to support your users through the transition. I was thinking about our own story. We have been, we're obviously highly embedded at Avanade within the Microsoft stack, and we're also a part of all of the different TAP programs that Microsoft has for early adopters. So Avanade and Accenture, we were one of the first implementations of Teams, and we started leveraging it and got it out to 400,000 users very quickly. And so we've been measuring and leveraging different data points to measure our own transition into Teams. Skype culturally was very beloved within Avanade, and there was a heavy reliance on being able to chat, presence awareness, and leveraging Skype for our conference calls and our meetings. Being a global company, and especially having colleagues that we work with day to day all over the country, it's really important for us to be able to connect and to remove that geographic divide by leveraging screen sharing and leveraging conference calls and meetings. And so while this data is a little old, we're actually in the process of making our final cutover. I'm going to direct you to the gray box that is on the right-hand side for the key metrics. So initially, we had done about 320 individuals out of 10,000 to do a Teams only cutover. And so these were, special pilot users, if you want to say, that we converted over to Teams. No more Skype. They were leveraging Teams only for meetings and for telephony and measuring that transition. The remaining group lived in islands mode where they had Skype for Business running and Teams running at the same time. And so the transition was optional for them. They were able to use Teams if they wanted to use Teams. So then you can look at, desktop versus mobile usage. So there is still a lot of usage in Skype in these numbers, but the parity of, the adoption of Teams is really catching up. And you can look at this in a similar way to how Teams has kind of grown in the industry. But for a large company like ourselves, we allowed for that experimentation, allowing for the natural transition, and people are getting there themselves, and their colleagues are kind of pushing them in that direction as well. So now we have 6,800 active users and just 4,200 inactive users. So out of that 320 who were the early adopters who went to Teams and had Skype decommissioned, we've got 6,800, 6,500 of those who have been become Teams users on their own. So I think it's really interesting to take a look at the data and to benchmark yourself, and to also create different waves, transition waves around what benchmark are you looking to see and to find over what period of time, and to measure your adoption and to take a look from that angle. So again, more data just around our Teams activity. So kind of, two graphs showing how we are gradually starting to ramp down on our usage of Skype for Business, and Teams activity is rapidly ramping up. And one thing about the middle box that I like to highlight is that, the chat messages are very high in adoption, very high in uptick. The channel messages, not quite as fast growing. And again, not to say that we are not a transparent culture, because I think we actually are. It just goes to show that this is a bit of a transition. So where you would send an email to someone or send a chat to a one-on-one conversation, conversing in the channel messages oftentimes can be a bit of a shift culturally, because of the transparency, because of putting yourself out there, and the cultural implications of saying something that may not necessarily be intended for a wider audience within the team. So these are just a few of the items that we've been tracking in our own Teams migration. And as we're making this final leap in converting all of our users to Teams, it is, we're gathering lessons learned. We're supporting our users. I see continually that there are, lunch and learns. There are videos that our IT team produces and shares around how best to leverage Teams. And I learned so much more from my colleagues who are saying, oh, well, we can leverage Teams this way, and we can position a tab and create a tab for this. Or, as a project becomes mature, we move it from the business development into its own actual team ready for growth and collaboration. So, just a few of the lessons learned that we went through that I would like to highlight. Change management approach can accelerate or impede your team's deployment. And so, it's not just an email and a link and a training, or a link to training. It's so much more than that. It's really developing champions. It's developing a core group. It's working very closely with a core group that can become your champion group, that you will then that will then help evangelize teams moving forward and be emissaries within their own respective departments. It's also not a correlation. Sky for Business to Teams, it's not a simple technology migration. This is a people migration. And, going back to my first thoughts, that it's changing the way you work. It's really important to acknowledge that and to take a look at your culture and to think about, what are people going to be comfortable doing? What aspects within teams are there going to be some resistance? Are people going to be looking for greater security, and understanding what that piece might be? And then the last one is, your migration end state is temporary. Teams will continue to evolve, and your usage within your organization will continue to evolve. And that's a really great and beautiful thing. So from an infrastructure perspective, this is really touching on the IT aspect of it, that technically Teams requires so much more bandwidth. And so, that is something that might be harder to control, and it's definitely something outside of the Microsoft realm. So you may have complaints about Teams or weaknesses about Teams that it's not really a matter of Teams. It's a fact that you need to look at other ways to problem solve, and it might be within the infrastructure. It might be within your internet access and the network access. So white glove is also another term that we use quite a bit when we're talking about, adoption and onboarding. It's really giving that white glove treatment to your user groups. And I was working for an organization that had, a core group of users who really are, very traditional, but they are the bread and butter of the organization. And this group of users, they are somewhat resistant to change, but when they change, everyone changes together. And they provided the white glove treatment. And these are just a couple of ideas around, communication to get the word out. Don't let rumors bring you down. Training, different ideas for training, and then how to set up different resources at many different levels to allow folks to connect with someone if they're trying to do something special with Teams. One thing I like to point out is an etiquette guide. So because we're kind of bringing some of those social networking aspects into the enterprise, it's a little bit of a different world. So, the ability in conversations to tag people and to use emojis and to like a post, and these all have very special communication mechanisms. So liking, you can instruct folks in an etiquette guide to tag someone if you want them to see the post, see the message, or you can like a post to acknowledge that you've read it, but you don't need to type back, okay, I got it. And so coming up with an etiquette guide is the lighter side of governance, of just behavioral things that come with Teams now that I think are really important. There's so many other smaller nuances that we don't need to govern at the company-wide level, but provide our users guidance in, hey, if you really want someone to see it, just mention them and like a post to acknowledge that you've read it. So in addition to passive analytics and passive data collection, how are people using it? There's also success stories and surveys, active feedback. So these are also great ways of understanding, where does Team stand and how are we tracking on our implementation? What are the success stories that we've found, and what are the stories that, or where are the pain points of, people starting to use Teams, and what do they not like about it? So surveys, success stories, this active feedback can also provide you with information on how to course correct or where to go. And so I like to kind of also point out, kind of close to when we did the last webinar, there was another article that came out that Slack was starting to take aim at Teams' weaknesses. And it was a really interesting thing. So for all of the areas that Teams is lacking, Slack created this new news piece of focusing on all of the highlights of their product that really take them to the next level and make them better than Teams. And this was right after Teams announced, Microsoft announced that Teams was outpacing Slack in user count. So you can kind of see a little dichotomy kind of going on there. But what I want to point out for this is that focusing on product weakness doesn't necessarily solve the problem. And so users will often do that. Users will harp on, in resistance to change, they will harp on the weaknesses of the product and why they don't want to move over, why it's inferior to the way they've been doing something. And so don't focus on those product weaknesses or address them. Understand, hear them out, why they're doing, why they find this to be a roadblock, this pain point to be a roadblock, and let's try to figure out another way to continue to move them forward. So, I mean, there are a couple of known weaknesses with the platform that definitely impede user adoption. So there's, lack of searchable tagging, the ease of use of toggling between Teams tenants, and just how heavy the clients can be on the desktop. So there are a few items, and there are definitely different ways that you can try and overcome those and curb your users around some of those weaknesses. But another way is to also focus on a strategic plan. So come up with your strategic plan on how your groups will use it, how your groups will use Teams. And one of those ideas is setting up templates. So you can create Teams templates for some of your key business functions, and the template can be a great way of increasing project startup time. It can increase the familiarity with the tool in having certain resources all collected together, and just allow you to have a good place to start. So this is just kind of a scrubbed case study of how we worked with one organization in improving how their IT projects were run. So this is a really great case study because you can think about who ends up becoming the early adopter of Teams or the first pilot group of Teams. It's more than likely going to be IT. IT gets all the new toys, they play with them first, they figure out what the strengths and weaknesses of the toy are, or of the tool, not the toy, are, and they start to envision how the business might consume these different resources. And so we worked with an organization in creating some different Teams templates for their IT projects, and creating different tabs that were consistent with the different life cycle and milestones that and reporting needs that they had for their IT projects. And so this is just a great way of saying, okay, we're going to create you an IT project team, and it's going to have all the right tabs so you don't have to recreate them, and it can have all of the files and documents and the planner, with the settings for planner already embedded. So there are a couple options in setting up Teams templates. So within the Teams application, you can do this, but it really only copies over members, channels, tabs, and settings. It doesn't bring any content under the tabs, and you can't create a new channel based on an existing channel. So then there's the Teams Graph API, which gives you everything from the previous version, but it can also create new channels and tabs, and it can carry over limited content. The last option is robotic process automation, which is a fancy way of saying there are third-party products out there on the marketplace that can allow you to replicate Teams and have all of the content, more content types are supported, and it can help you rework the Teams UI depending on the template. So these are just a couple of examples for creating templates, but templates are really the next phase, right? So figuring out what are some best use cases for Teams, and then figuring out a way to make it faster and allow people ease of use in using it. So I am going to wrap up my section of this conversation and just leave you with, the employee experience key facets. I just always like to remind people that, all of these pieces really do embody and are supported by technology. So, I love that it brings in conversation, whether it be in person, whether it be over the phone, whether it be on digital channels. Conversation is really embedded with the information and the processes that we execute in business. And really what we're looking at with our transition and supporting users after our Teams rollout is the behavior, and modifying the tool to work with the behavior of our users. We don't want to ask our users to change that much, and realizing that it could actually be a pretty large change. So on that note, thank you very much. I'm going to transition this back to Melissa, who is going to continue the webinar.
Okay, thanks so much, Jill, for that great explanation of how we can all really help to support our team users. I know I personally learned a lot from it. And now I'll go ahead and I'll jump right into Cardiolog Analytics. And I'll quickly go over how analytics can help you boost adoption for SharePoint as well as Teams, and then move into improving engagement of Microsoft Teams. And as I'm moving into those dashboards, please feel free to send in any questions that you have from Jill's presentation. So when we're talking about boosting adoption in SharePoint, one of the most important steps is to actually measure the current and past adoption rates. And this helps you to better understand patterns in your users' use of the portal and really define what your goals are for increasing adoption. So starting off on this visitor adoption overview dashboard, we have a lot of data here that really helps us to see those patterns of adoption. So starting with this bar graph here, we can see the number of active users out of our total number of users, and that really gives us a good start, a good base here to see the proportion of your users who are active, and gives you a much better idea of how much support or training you might need to provide. Over here, we can see the average length of visit, and this really helps us to understand how much time people are spending in the portal. We also have metrics on average depth of visit and bounce rate, so we can really see how deep users are going into the portal. And this can be a great insight. So for example, if there's an average page depth of only 1 page per visit, we know that we may need to make some changes to content. And having a roadmap with our clear goals is really important in boosting adoption. So updating existing content can be one of our goals that just a quick glance at the analytics has helped us to define. And what's really nice is right now we're seeing an overview with a lot of data, but we can just as easily filter this to see just a specific time period, whether that's by quarter or by month. So I'll click on Q1 here to show you an example. And now you can see that our data synced to just show us information from Q1. So we get an even more in-depth understanding of adoption during specific points in time. And now we'll go into a little bit more detail around these active and inactive users in our next dashboard. So we can see here our active and our inactive users split up by department. So instead of spending all of our time and our training budget on all of our departments, let's really narrow in onto those departments with the most inactive users and really allocate our training budget in a strategic way. So for example, we might want to focus our budget on R&D and sales, for example here. And if we want to personalize the training even more, we can see specifically which users have the most visits, as well as which users have 0 visits. And then we can see specifically which users need more training and support. And again, going back to measuring adoption rates over time from the past to the current, here we can see how activity in our portal has changed in the past 2 years. Hopefully in your environment, you would see an increase, but it's also really helpful to see cases similar to ours, where there's a decrease in activity over time. And that gives you a great stepping point to go ahead and start finding out what may have caused that decrease in activity in the portal. And that's just one example of where we can really take action and improve employee experience in the portal. And so with this, we can really see what metrics could have caused that decrease in activity. And one of those metrics could potentially be search, which is the next dashboard we'll go into. So just a second ago, I mentioned search as a metric that could lead to decreased activity in the portal. And everyone knows having a frustrating time searching for things and not being able to find what you're looking for can really turn us away from using the portal to look for information. So this is an easy way to really take action and again, improve people's experiences in the portal. So starting at the left side of this dashboard, here we can see everything people are searching for and how successful they are in finding results for those searches. So let's click on the most searched term, which for us is benefits. And now we can see how many people are searching for something related to benefits and how often they're finding answers when they're searching for benefits. So we can see that benefits has been searched over 1,000 times by almost 700 users. But what's really interesting is that we can see the average search result position is 10.8. So people are really having to scroll down to the 10th or the 11th result to get an answer. And even then, only about 50% of people are clicking on any of the results. So people are really looking for benefits in our SharePoint portal, and they're not really finding the results that they need. So this would be a great opportunity here to create another goal, to maybe go through this results list and see which results are irrelevant, and then modify that content or create new content where it's necessary. And again, since they're scrolling down so far, let's rearrange that search results list. And this is just one example of the many actions we can take with search to really improve the portal experience for your users. And I'll just quickly touch on portal resources, because another crucial step in improving adoption is to really complete that transition to a new portal. So we can see here in this environment, we're currently transitioning from SharePoint 2013 to SharePoint Online. And what's nice is we can even see exactly the number of tree items that we still have left to move over. And this really gives us a clear view of how far along we are in our migration, which can really tell us why people may not be adopting the new portal. And if a majority of tree items are still in the old portal, people will continue using the old portal rather than the new one. So really finalizing migration is another important step to increase adoption of the new portal. And that was a quick overview of how analytics can help you improve adoption within SharePoint. But now I'll jump into our new Teams Analytics dashboards to really show you how you can continue boosting adoption after your Teams rollout by measuring your users' interactions and usage of Teams. So starting off here, we're seeing data on all of our current teams, but we can also choose to see data for a specific team. So I'll choose management, for example, here. Should load in just a second. And what we can also do is sort by specific channel if we want to dive deep even further. So over here, we can see top contributors, and we can sort them by if they're most active from starting a thread, channel messages, replies, attachments. But on the flip side, this is also a great place to see our most inactive users, right? So we can see which users aren't using Teams to its full potential and who may need more training and support. And in our next dashboard over here, we can see Teams activity. So we can really see the top teams. We can see how active each of these teams are to really get a good benchmark of what a top team looks like for your organization. And quickly moving into our influential users. So we can really see who is using Teams the most. Again, maybe we want to recognize and reward these users by having a rotating top Teams users on the SharePoint homepage, or maybe reach out to some of these influential users, have them share some tips, or host a quick session explaining some how-tos on using Teams. And just lastly, so as Jill mentioned, right now it's really important to begin transitioning to Teams as Skype for Business now has an official end date. But again, like she also mentioned, we really want to make sure that users aren't just chatting in Teams, but that they're using it productively. So here we can actually see really what files are they sharing, what apps are they using, and this will help us to determine if users understand the full functionality of Teams and what maybe they're lacking in and where we can provide some training. So I'll quickly move into Cardiolog Engage, which is our advanced internal communications tool to, again, help you to boost engagement after your rollout of Teams. So within Cardiolog Engage, we want to build campaigns to really target specific people with a specific message. So for example, we can target everyone in the organization, or we can filter them by department, office, country, etc. We can also choose a specific team to send our message to, like maybe marketing or the IT team. Or we can base this on user behavior. So maybe inactive users that haven't interacted with Teams ever or for the past 30 days. Or maybe those users who are engaged and viewed a specific campaign. Then you can select a channel. And what's really nice is you can message them directly within Teams. And with text and design, we can have them RSVP. Hey, are you coming to the party? And we can target specifically the people that chose maybe and send them a message saying, can you confirm? Or those that chose yes, let's send them an email with some reminders before the event. And lastly, we have our trigger. So the campaign can be scheduled to go out at 8 a.m. or it can be triggered when they're viewing a certain page. So for example, the SharePoint search results page for more than 30 seconds. Then let's have a pop-up to say, did you find what you're looking for? And just lastly, really quickly, I wanted to show you one of our really neat features, I think, using some bot technology to really engage with our users. So we're on our SharePoint homepage here, and let's say we're looking for some information around maternity leave. and we're searching and we're not finding any results. And then we have a campaign pop up from Cardiolog Engage saying, having a hard time finding what you're looking for, tag Ziggy in Teams for assistance. And it will prompt Teams to open. And then we can tag Ziggy. Hopefully he'll load for us today. Let's see. And let's ask Ziggy directly about maternity leave. And then Ziggy will send us an information with some link to our employee benefits program. So as we mentioned before, search can be really frustrating. Implementing a campaign like this can really help users find the information they're looking for without them having to put in any extra effort. And that's really an easy way to improve the employee experience. So before the end of our time today, hopefully we still have some time for some questions, but I just quickly wanted to go over a few things. So I wanted to mention that Cardiolog Analytics and Jill are offering a free one-on-one evaluation session to go over more about collaboration in teams, how to boost SharePoint adoption, how to increase engagement with your intranet, and anything else we've covered today. And again, this is a free evaluation. You just need to email info@entlock.com after this webinar. And I also wanted to mention that we will be at SP Fest Seattle. So please feel free to stop by the Cardiolog Analytics booth, come say hi, enter our raffle. And I'm also very excited to share that we will be collaborating again with Jill for the last session in our webinar series at SP Fest. So Jill and her colleague, Davey Bryan from Avanade, will be presenting a session on how to benefit from workplace analytics for the modern workplace. Really going more into workplace analytics and how you can really leverage that data to not only improve customer experience, but also using those insights to improve the employee experience. And that will take place Thursday, August 22nd from 12:40 to 1:10 p.m. in room 609. So if you'll be at SP Fest Seattle or you know anyone that's going who would be interested, we would really appreciate if you could let them know that this will be going on. And luckily, we do still have a few minutes left at the end of our time today, until the end of our time today. So we can go ahead and look over some of the questions. And if you had questions, we didn't have the chance to submit them, please feel free to send those now through GoToWebinar. So I see a question here from Tom, and he's asking, can I create my own dashboards within Power BI? And the answer to that is yes, you can. All the dashboards that I just showed in Cardiolog Analytics are pre-made reports that come with the product, but you can just as easily create your own report within Power BI. It has a very easy to use user interface. I see a question from, I think, Kelly, maybe, and she asked, is Ziggy a bot? So Ziggy is a bot created through a Cardiolog Engage campaign. So through Cardiolog Engage, you can create a campaign where Ziggy the bot would pop up, or where the campaign would pop up and explain to you how to use Ziggy within Teams to get some more information, depending on what they were looking for. But it can also be for other things, depending on what your needs are. And I see Dan asked if the presentation will be available to view again online. So it will be. We'll be uploading the webinar shortly afterwards, and an email will be sent out to everyone with a link to the presentation. So you'll be able to see everything Jill spoke about earlier if you missed any of it. I also see a question for you here, Jill, from Paul, and he's asking, is there a typical proportion of number of channels per team?
So actually, you can have a lot of channels per team. I actually am not sure I know the exact figure. It's probably something you can look up, but from what I've seen with just usage, it can be very, very many. So, and by many, I mean like 50. So yeah, and then now in September, Microsoft has released in the timeline that private channels are coming, finally, and it's been one of the most requested items on the user voice. So it's finally coming, and you'll be able to lock down some of those channels.
Amazing. Also a question for you from Idris. What are the average industry KPIs for SharePoint adoption? If you know, average percent active users.
Oh gosh. I don't know that there's average. I mean, because you could look at this a lot of different ways, right? So within an organization, every organization is different. They may have a lot of different tools. They may be very open to allowing other tools. There's shadow IT on top of IT allowing different business units to own their own tools. So there aren't really any industry-specific KPIs that you're looking to achieve as far as, measure of adoption. It's really in the eye of the beholder. And then, the way Microsoft looks at it is they're looking for consumption. So they succeed when users use our tools, especially in the cloud. And so they want to get you using their tools and exclusively their tools as much as they possibly can. So that's just kind of the underlying incentive that the sales folks within Microsoft have, as well as how they're nudging you along to start using their tools. So it's kind of a long way of saying it's complicated and it depends.
Thanks, Jill. And I think we have time. I see one more question about Cardiolog. So Rebecca asked, where is the data stored? So I just showed you our SaaS version of Cardiolog Analytics, and all of that data is stored on Microsoft Azure servers. But our product is also available on-premise if you would prefer to keep your data in-house. But I think that's about all of the time that we have today. So again, this webinar will be uploaded and an email will be sent out to everyone who signed up. So feel free to share with anyone else that you think might be interested. And again, we're at SPFest Seattle, so it'd be great to meet you. Hopefully you can have time to join Jill's session. It should be really interesting and informative. But a huge thanks again to Jill for a great presentation, and thank you to everyone who joined us on the webinar today. Have a great rest of your day.